He signed the papers at 4:52 on a Thursday afternoon in an air-conditioned office on Bourdieu Road, and he did not read the second page. The woman across the desk wore a cream blouse and a watch worth more than the house he grew up in. She slid the pen toward him with 2 fingers. Behind him, through the glass, Lagos moved the way Lagos always moves. Car horns, generator hum. A hawker calling out sachet water in a voice gone hoarse by noon. He signed his name. He signed away a marriage of 11 years to a woman who had once walked 6 kilometers in the rain to bring him medicine when he was too sick to stand. He did not call her. He sent a message. 9 words. It is finished. Do not come to Lagos again. The message was delivered at 5:04 p.m. It was read at 5:04 p.m. She did not reply. He put the phone face down on the desk, and he felt, for the first time in 3 years, that he had made a clean decision. He did not know that in 19 days a phone would ring in that same office, and that the woman he had just erased would be the only person in this country who could answer what was asked on the other end of it. Her name was Nkechi Okafor, and she was 38 years old. She weighed 51 kilograms, which was 4 kilograms less than she had weighed the previous December, because for 7 months she had been eating 1 meal a day so that her mother-in-law's blood pressure medication could be bought without asking Kolade for money. She did not tell anyone this. She recorded it in a school exercise book with a green cover, 40 leaves, the kind that costs 150 naira at the stationery stall beside the church. She wrote every expense in a small, tight hand. Date, item, amount, balance. She had been keeping that book for 11 years. It was her 14th one. The first 13 were stacked in a wooden box under the bed, tied with the same twine, in order. She lived in Umuoji, in the compound Kolade's father had built in 1979, in a house with a corrugated roof that sang when it rained, and a kitchen with a coal pot she cleaned every Sunday, whether she had cooked on it or not. She woke at 4:40. She swept the yard before the sun cleared the mango tree. She wore a wrapper of faded green and gold that she had bought at Onitsha Main Market for 200 naira 9 years earlier, and she washed it by hand, and it was clean. Worn and clean. There is a difference between those 2 words that only certain people understand, and every one of them is watching this story right now. She had one object that mattered. A brass scale, the small kind traders use, with 2 shallow pans, and a set of 5 weights, given to her by her grandmother in 1998 in the market at Enugu. Her grandmother had used it to weigh crayfish and ground melon seed for 31 years, and had never once been accused of cheating a customer. Nkechi kept it wrapped in cloth on the highest shelf. She did not sell with it. She used it to teach herself. When she was 14, she had discovered that she could look at a heap of grain and know its weight to within 50 grams before the pans ever settled. It was not magic. It was 11,000 repetitions. But the traders at Umuoji Market called her the girl who does not need the scale, and by the time she was 20, they had stopped weighing in front of her, because it embarrassed them. She smelled of shea butter and laundry starch and, faintly, of the ginger she chewed for her stomach. Her hands looked like they had never stopped working. She wanted one thing. She wanted her mother-in-law, Mama Adaora, 73, half-blind in the left eye, to reach the end of the year without collapsing again on the concrete floor of the parlor. That was all. Not a house in Lagos, not a car. Not the return of the man who had stopped calling in March. She wanted the old woman to live, and she wanted the exercise book to balance, and she wanted the yard swept. When Kolade's message came at 5:04 p.m., she was standing at the coal pot with a wooden spoon in her hand. She read it. She set the phone on the ledge. She stirred the pot for another 4 minutes, because the egusi would burn otherwise, and burning food is a waste. And waste was the one thing her grandmother had never forgiven. Then she carried the pot inside, and she served Mama Adaura, and she sat on the floor beside the old woman's chair, and she ate nothing, and she said, in a voice with no shake in it at all, "Mama, eat before it goes cold." She did not cry. That night, she opened the green exercise book and wrote the date, and in the item column, 4 letters. Rent. Then the amount. Then she closed the book. The man who had signed the papers had a system, and the system was a woman named Daisy Bright. Daisy was 31. She was a business development manager at a commodities firm on Bourdieu Road, and she was not evil, which is the part that will make you angry. She wore hand sanitizer and peppermint gum, and she had a way of looking at a person's shoes before their face, and she believed with total sincerity that Kolade Okafor was a man being held back by a village that could not understand the size of him. She said this to him gently. She said it at dinner. She said it over 11 months, in soft, reasonable sentences, and each sentence was a stone, and by the end there was a wall. She had never met Nkechi. She had seen one photograph. In the photograph, Nkechi was wearing the green and gold wrapper and standing beside a table of yams, and Daisy had said, kindly, as if she were being kind, "She looks like someone who works very hard." That was the sentence. That was the whole cruelty of it, and Daisy did not know she had said anything at all. Kolade's firm was a grain trading company. He had built it from a single lorry in 2009. He had 18 employees, a warehouse in Apapa, and a contract worth more than everything else combined, a supply agreement with a Ghanaian buyer that renewed every August. He wore a navy blue cap in the early years, one his mother had given him, and he had stopped wearing it in 2021 because Daisy said it aged him. And there was a witness. There is always a witness. His name was Emmanuel, 39, his warehouse manager, who had known Nkechi for a decade, who had eaten her egusi at the compound 11 times, and who was standing in the doorway of the office on Bourdieu Road at 4:52 p.m. on that Thursday afternoon with a folder in his hands when Kolade picked up the pen. Emmanuel opened his mouth. He looked at the woman in the cream blouse. He looked at the floor. He closed the folder, and he went back downstairs, and he did not say anything for 19 days. And that silence is the most honest thing in this entire story. Because you have been that man, and so have I. Mama Adaura collapsed on the 9th of the month at 6:15 in the morning, while Nkechi was in the yard with the broom. She heard it. That is the part Nkechi would describe later, when she described it at all, not the seeing, the hearing. The sound a body makes on concrete is not loud. It is a soft, wrong sound, like a bag of rice set down badly, and it does not belong inside a house, and the ear knows before the mind does. The clinic at Umuoji had one doctor, and he came on Tuesdays. This was Saturday. The hospital was in Onitsha, 41 kilometers, and the taxi to Onitsha was 3,500 naira, and the green exercise book said, on that morning, in Nkechi's small, tight hand, that she had 4,120 naira in the world. She took the old woman. She paid the 3,500. At the reception desk of the hospital in Onitsha, a woman with a name tag that read Blessing looked at the wrapper, and then at the plastic bag Nkechi carried the medicine in, and then finally at Nkechi's face, and she said the sentence that this country has said to its poor for 60 years. Deposit is 50,000 naira. Cash, Nkechi explained. She did not beg. This is important, and I want you to hold it, she explained. She had 620 naira remaining. She had a husband whose company had a warehouse in Apapa. She had 11 years of records in a book under a bed. She could pay. She would pay. She needed the old woman to be seen now, this morning, because the left side of her face had gone slack, and everyone in that lobby knew what that meant. Blessing did not look up from the register. Deposit is 50,000 naira. Behind Nkechi, in that lobby, there were 14 people sitting on green plastic chairs. A man in a brown suit, 2 nurses passing through, a boy of about 9 holding his father's hand. Not one of them stood up. A woman near the door lifted her phone and then lowered it and turned her body slightly toward the wall. Nkechi went outside. It was 9:20 in the morning, and the sun on the concrete forecourt was already the kind that makes the air above the ground shimmer and go liquid. She walked to the roadside, and she called Kolade. It rang 11 times. She called again. It rang 11 times. On the third call, a voice answered, and it was not his, and the voice said, pleasantly, "He's in a meeting. Can I take a message?" And Nkechi said, "Tell him his mother is dying." And the line was quiet for 2 seconds, and the voice said, "I'll pass it on." She sat on the low wall by the gate for 4 hours. She did not eat. At 1:40 p.m., a bus went past, and the heat coming off its side was like standing near an open oven, and the diesel smell settled in her mouth and stayed there. And her legs had gone numb below the knee from the concrete edge, and still she sat. Because inside that building an old woman was lying on a bench in a corridor with a slack face, and someone had to be at the gate when they finally called her name. At 1:52, a woman came out of the hospital carrying a rubber bucket. She was maybe 60. She had been mopping the corridor since 6 that morning, and her name was Pauline Owusu Boateng, and she had worked in that hospital for 22 years. And she had seen this exact thing happen 400 times. And she stopped. And she looked at Nkechi's feet, which were bare because the sandal strap had broken on the walk from the taxi. She went back inside. She came out with a cup of ginger tea, and she put it in Nkechi's hands, and she said nothing at all. And then she stood there while Nkechi drank it. And the tea was so hot it hurt, and Nkechi drank all of it. Then Pauline said, "Your wrapper." Onitsha, Maine, the stall by the second gate, the one with the blue awning. Nkechi looked up. "My sister sold that cloth," Pauline said. 9 years. She picked up her bucket. "You are the one who does not need the scale." And she walked back inside, and Nkechi sat holding an empty cup, and she did not understand yet, and neither do you, and that is how it should be. At 4:10 that afternoon, they admitted Mama Adaura. No one explained why. A nurse simply came out and said the name, and Nkechi followed her down a corridor that smelled of disinfectant and rain. And the old woman was moved to a bed in a ward with 8 beds. And a doctor with a stethoscope hanging crooked said the words ischemic and within the window, and she is fortunate. Nkechi sat down on the plastic chair beside the bed, and for the first time in 9 hours her shoulders came down from around her ears. The fan above turned. Somewhere a trolley went past. She thought, "It is over. The worst of it is over." At 4:30, a man in a brown suit came into the ward with a clipboard. He was from accounts. He said that the admission had been authorized against a guarantor, and that the guarantor was a company, and he read the name of the company from his clipboard, and it was Kolade's company, and Nkechi's chest opened up because she thought he had come. Then the man said, "And the guarantor has instructed that the account be settled by close of business Monday, or the patient is to be discharged. He also asked that we inform you." The man checked his clipboard again, because these were not his words, and he wanted to get them exactly right, that this is the final assistance. He nodded and went away. Nkechi sat in the plastic chair. The old woman slept. The fan turned. It was 4:36 in the afternoon on the 9th of the month, and outside the window the rain had started on the tin roofs of Onitsha. And it was not over. It had never been over. It was only that the floor she had been standing on had been a lid, and it had just come off. Pauline found her at 7:00 the next morning, in the same chair. She sat down on the edge of the empty bed opposite, with her hands in her lap, and she looked at Nkechi for a long time. 22 years I have washed these floors, she said. Do you know what I hear? Everything. Nobody looks at the woman with the bucket. She smoothed her uniform over her knees. Your husband's company. The grain company. They have a Ghana contract. August, every year. Nkechi said, How do you? My son works at the port in Tema. Pauline said it flatly. He loads it. She reached into the pocket of her uniform and took out a phone with a cracked screen, and she scrolled with one finger, slowly, the way people scroll when they have to hold the phone far from their eyes. 2 weeks ago, Pauline said, a container from your husband's warehouse was rejected at Tema. 12 tons. The buyer says the weight on the papers is not the weight in the container. Your husband says his scale is correct. The buyer says his scale is correct. She looked up. The contract is worth more than everything else he owns, and it renews in 11 days. And they have brought 3 men to arbitrate, and none of them can agree, because the difference is small. Small enough to be a lie. Small enough to be an error. She put the phone away. 14 years ago, Pauline said, I stood at the second gate at Onitsha, Maine, and I watched a girl of 24 look at a heap of melon seed for 4 seconds and say 9 kilos and 200 grams, and the trader weighed it 3 times to shame her, and it was 9 kilos and 200 grams. She stood up and picked up her bucket. The men in Tema are using a scale that has been calibrated 4 times, and they still cannot agree, because the problem is not the scale. She went to the door. Then she stopped. You should sit up straight, Pauline said. Somebody is going to call you. And she went out into the corridor, and the mop began, and Nkechi sat in the plastic chair with her grandmother's face in her mind, and behind her in the bed Mama Adaora opened her one good eye and said, very quietly, Nkechi, my son is a fool. But you are not. The call came on the 19th day at 11:22 in the morning. It did not come to Nkechi. It came to the office on Bourdion Road, on the landline, and Kolade took it standing, and he had not slept in 4 days, and there was a gray stubble on his jaw, and his shirt had been worn twice. The man on the line was named Chief Mensah. He was 71. He was the Ghanaian buyer, and he had bought grain from that warehouse for 9 years, and he had never once raised his voice on a telephone. Behind him in Tema there was a container and a dispute, and 3 arbitrators, and a contract that would die at midnight on the 31st. Chief Mensah said, We have found a way to settle this. There is one condition. Kolade said, Anything. Our arbitration allows for a 3rd assessor, Chief Mensah said. Someone both sides accept. My port manager has proposed a name. It is a name I know, because I have bought melon seed at Onitsha Main Market for 30 years. There was a pause on the line, and in that pause Kolade Okafor felt something move in his chest that he had not felt since he was a boy. The name is Nkechi Okafor, said Chief Mensah. My people say she is the finest weigher of grain alive in this country. They say she does not need a scale. He paused. They also tell me she has your surname. That is a coincidence, I think. Can you find her? Because if you cannot find her by Friday, there is no contract. Kolade did not answer. Chief Mensah said, Are you there? And Kolade Okafor, 38 employees, warehouse in Apapa, office on Bourdieu Road, went down onto both knees on the carpet of that office with the telephone still against his ear. And he made a sound that Emmanuel, standing in the doorway with a folder, would not describe to anyone for the rest of his life. She came on Thursday. She did not come because he asked. He did not ask. He could not find the words, and in the end it was Emmanuel who drove the 400 kilometers and stood in the yard at Umuoji with his cap in his hands. She came because the old woman said, "Go. The warehouse in Apapa on a Thursday morning at 8:40 smells of dust and jute and diesel." There were 19 men standing on the concrete when she walked in, arbitrators, port officials, Chief Mensah's people, Adieze Bright in a cream blouse near the office stairs. Nkechi wore the green and gold wrapper. It was clean. She carried a cloth bundle under her arm. Nobody offered her a chair. Chief Mensah crossed the floor. He was a small man with white in his hair, and he stopped in front of her, and he took off his hat, and every single person on that concrete floor saw him do it, and the room changed temperature. "Madam," he said. That was all. 2 syllables, and 19 men who had not looked at her adjusted their shoulders. She walked to the open sacks. She unwrapped the cloth bundle and set her grandmother's brass scale on a crate, and she did not use it. She stood over the first sack for perhaps 6 seconds. She moved to the second. The third. She put her hand into the grain up to the wrist and lifted a fistful and let it fall and listened to it fall. And there was no sound in that warehouse except grain returning to grain. At the 11th sack she stopped. She said, "This one has been in water." An arbitrator started to speak. Chief Mensah raised one finger without turning around. "Not much," Nkechi said. "A roof, maybe. 2 nights of rain, then it dried." She put her hand in again. "It weighs correctly on your scale. It weighs correctly on his scale. Both scales are honest." She straightened up and looked at Chief Mensah. "The grain drank the rain in Nigeria and gave it back in Ghana. Nobody stole from you. A roof did." The oldest arbitrator went very still. Then he walked to the 11th sack and put his own hand in and stood there for a long moment and took his hand out and said one word in Twi that nobody translated. Chief Mensah turned around to face the 19 men. "Weigh sack 11, he said. "Dry it. Weigh it again." They weighed it at 2:15 that afternoon. The difference was 1,340 grams. Multiplied across 12 tons, it was the exact discrepancy that had sat between 2 companies for 19 days. Kolade was standing near the office stairs. He had not spoken since she entered the building. He took one step forward, and he said her name. And it came out wrong, and Nkechi turned and looked at him, not with hatred, which he could have survived, but with the plain, flat attention of a woman looking at a stranger who has said something in the street. Chief Mensah signed the renewal at 4:52 that afternoon. He signed it in the warehouse, on a crate with Nkechi's brass scale sitting beside the papers. Then he set down the pen and he said, quietly, so that only the people nearest him heard it, "The contract renews on one further condition. Quality assessment for all shipments from this warehouse will be certified by an independent assessor, not the seller, not the buyer." He looked at Nkechi. "Name your fee, madam." She did not answer immediately. She reached into the folds of her wrapper, and she took out a school exercise book with a green cover, 40 leaves, and she opened it to the last written page, and she looked at the balance column. And Kolade Okafor, from 11 meters away, recognized the handwriting. Adieze Bright reached for the railing of the office stairs with both hands. Nkechi closed the book. By the following year there was a certification office at the Apapa port, and the sign on the door said Okafor Grain Assessment, and it was not his name. 9 warehouses used it. Chief Mensah's firm mandated it across 4 countries. The first training session for weight assessors in this country was held in that same Apapa warehouse, on that same concrete floor. And 41 people attended, and the woman who ran it wore a green and gold wrapper and put a brass scale on the table at the front and told them, on the first morning, that they should learn to work without it. Kalade thought he left Nkechi with nothing. A house with a singing roof, an old woman with a slack face, and 620 naira. But he did not leave her with nothing. He left her with the only things he had never been able to see, because they were not on her body, and they were not in the house, and they had no price he recognized. Her hands. Her memory. 11,000 repetitions in a market at Enugu. 11 years of records in a green book. A grandmother who weighed crayfish for 31 years and never cheated anyone. He walked past all of it every day for 11 years, and he thought it was a woman sweeping a yard. You can close a door on a person. You can change the number they call, sign a paper in an air-conditioned room, and tell yourself that the smallness of their life is proof of the smallness of them. But what a person carries in their hands was never yours to take. It was never even yours to see. And on the day the world finally needs it, it will not be you they call. She still wakes at 4:40. She still sweeps the yard before the sun clears the mango tree. Mama Adaura sits in the parlor with her one good eye and listens to her daughter-in-law's footsteps on the concrete. And on Sundays, Nkechi cleans a coal pot she no longer needs to cook on. The brass scale sits on the highest shelf, wrapped in cloth. And in a wooden box beneath the bed, tied with the same twine, in order, there are now 16 exercise books. So let me ask you something, and I want you to sit with it before you answer. If the person you decided was beneath you turned out to be the only one who could save you, would you have the courage to kneel? And if you knelt, and they looked at you the way you look at a stranger in the street, would you understand that you were being given exactly what you gave? Leave your answer in the comments. I really want to read it. And subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.